They never detonated another hydrogen bomb. There's a simple reason.
This was the last one?
54 was the last one. They scheduled one for 56, but it was never detonated. They canceled it because it was to be an underwater test, and they decided, in view of what happened with the 54 test, where not only did they lose the 3-mile tunnels, but the entire island was vaporized, and it went down and burning and boiling down to bedrock, and it was burning and boiling at bedrock for 3 days afterwards, till the ocean water finally damped it out.
So basically they started kind of a chain reaction.
They started a chain reaction in the rock, which certain scientists had so warned, and others said, oh, poo-poo, this can't possibly happen. And those who poo-pooed it, of course, were those who ran the tests, and they were performed, and they found out it can happen.
And they were afraid that the second explosion may ignite the very water of the oceans and explode the planet.
They were afraid of this for the simple reason that H2O is the most common substance on Earth, the most common compound, and it's everywhere. And if somehow they were managed to start a chain reaction in the water itself, it would go through the entire oceans everywhere, and that would be essentially the end of the Earth. They did not, fortunately, set off such a reaction. Whether it's damped by minerals or whatever else, I don't know, but they were fortunate in that that did not happen. So all further tests were abandoned, and of course the Russians start their H-bomb tests.
And because the Americans didn't give them the data, they had to repeat everything again.
Exactly. So they had their one and only test, which I believe was about 1959. And they expected, according to the reports which came even from Khrushchev later, about a 30 megaton yield. They got a little bit more, something they would never admit how much, but it was in excess of 100 megatons. And the Russians said they would never set off another hydrogen bomb again, because it was totally out of control, so far as they were concerned. Their mathematical models, their predictions, their so-called nuclear theory was a pile of garbage. They don't really know personally a nuclear physicist. He's published 125 papers and used to teach at UC Berkeley, who said the same thing. He says the nuclear scientists have no idea what's going on. They don't know what's going on with nuclear processes, period. And this from a nuclear physicist.
This is the famous explosion on an island in the sea north of Siberia, in basically the northern ocean. That was so powerful that it broke the needles on the seismographs, not only in Russia but in many other countries. The earthquake created by it was so powerful.
Well, that one I did not hear of. I most certainly don't hear of everything, and that's why it's necessary for people to get together and compare notes and do networking. Today, the networking via computers is what's getting information around faster than it can be stopped, because you cannot stop the network if the computers are on. It's nationwide, and all of the little computer bulletin boards, which are maintained privately. And this kind of information does get out. Back in the 50s, there were no computers and computer networks. It had to be verbal.
Talking about nuclear bombs, I was very interested when you mentioned that there are persistent rumors and even comments by some major physicists, Oppenheimer included, that the two devices that were exploded over Japan were actually of German origin, of German production.
This was alluded to by a German who was writing or connected with the book that was published in Toronto, Canada, outlining the history of the UFO development in Germany, and also making some passing reference to the nuclear program which Germany had ongoing during World War II. And it was known, it was found out after the war was over, it was known that the Germans had developed and had built a number of atomic bombs which were in their arsenal and apparently never used. And they were working on a super bomb of a totally unknown design, which they were going to plan to use on New York or London, probably London or New York, whichever they chose to wipe out first, which, according to the reports, a single bomb about the size of a pineapple was sufficient to wipe out the entire city, which is to say it was more powerful than the hydrogen bombs which were yet to be invented. But this
could easily be an antimatter bomb.
Very possibly. That's about the only thing that would do it. The German technology was so far advanced beyond ours, it's unbelievable, and it's unbelievable that they lost the war. but they did. And perhaps better for all of us that that did happen. But their technology was very advanced, and they were into these areas. Now, the reports were that, and this was allegedly admitted by Oppenheimer after the war was over, that the 2 bombs we dropped on Japan at Hiroshima and Nagasaki we did not build. Because we had an extreme shortage of plutonium. There was not enough plutonium to cover the head of a pin in May of 1945, and which was when Germany surrendered. It was May of 45? Yes.
May 45.
And by the time we came around to dropping the bomb in 46, there was a lot of time in between.
No, actually 45, August 45.
It's August 45, okay. There was a few months in between, and it was in that interim period that we suddenly were able to develop a bomb which was dropped, or actually not dropped, but tested at Trinity, New Mexico, allegedly the first nuclear device we had built. And within a few weeks after that, we dropped 2 bombs on Japan. The question is quite well asked. If we were so short of nuclear materials, they had enough uranium-235 to build bombs, but those were the huge devices like Fat Man, or Fat Boy as they called it, which required a gun barrel to bring the 2 charges of parts together.
A howitzer barrel.
A howitzer-type barrel, especially made by the Navy. And it was not a particularly high-yield device. It was rather sloppy, but at least it proved the principle. The question is, did we carry something like that over Japan, or did they drop one of those, and it was later claimed the Nagasaki bomb was actually a plutonium bomb? I can't prove it at this point. But I do know there were enough records at Los Alamos, where I was at the end of the war, to show that the Germans had developed quite a few nuclear devices. And that was not unknown up there at that time.
What is your explanation of why Hitler didn't use these devices at the end of the war?
I would say there is no good explanation unless you were to totally modify your view of what Hitler's real character was, his real nature of the person. He has been painted, of course, by many news media, continuing to this day, of course, as being a monster, a person without any feeling or heart, who's out to conquer the world. All of the records today show he was not out to conquer the world, and there's the actual military aspects of the weapons development in Germany were very peculiar. They would not release a weapon into general use in the German military until they had already produced a countermeasures weapon. There was no countermeasures of any type to an atomic bomb. Not at least they were known at that time or now. That is, after the bomb is triggered and set off, there is no countermeasures. The only countermeasure is that you don't set it off. It may have been for that reason that Hitler refused to use it. So it's a speculation, of course, at this point. If he had it and he was losing the war, why didn't he use it as a military weapon? He many times ignored the advice of his own military high staff because he got into the area of the Aryan racial considerations, the racial superiority, and when the British were on the beach at Dunkirk waiting to be evacuated back to England, after they were driven into the sea, the German High Command wanted to kill all of the British because, after all, they were soldiers and there was a war on, and there's about 500,000, and there were prime targets and legitimate targets in terms of war to be eliminated, as you would eliminate any army in the field. Hitler interceded and says, no, you will not attack them, you will let them escape. They're Aryans, you don't kill Aryans. That was his thinking at the time. The British survived, of course, and some Australians and others with them. And the end result, of course, they lived to come back to Europe another day, which, of course, did happen. But he had some very peculiar philosophies, and one among them was he did not want to wipe out necessarily a lot of Aryans, which he considered the British as being. So one has to take another look, no matter how difficult it may be, at some of Hitler's philosophy and find out where his head was really at, because you will not get a true picture from the current propaganda or the ongoing propaganda from the end of World War II or during World War II.